show them who you are. So living water flowing through, God, we thirst for more of you. Fill our hearts and fill our souls with one desire. It's to know you and to make you known. Let your name on high. Like the sun made darkness running high. We know we were made for so much more than ordinary lives. It's time for us to more than just survive. We were made to thrive. Made to thrive.
We are here at First Baptist. Thank you for joining in today, First Baptist Church here in DeQuincy. Once again, we're here by ourselves. We postponed church services until the future notice because of the spike in the corona cases. And we just want to be ahead of that and keep everyone safe. But we thank you for tuning in, and we will continue doing this until further notice. This week, I'm going to kind of pick up where I left off last week. When Jesus goes up, for y'all that weren't with me last week, Jesus goes up, he's ascended into heaven, but he leaves the disciples some instructions about go and make disciples and baptize and teach and obey, and I will be with you always. And so this week, we saw a lot of things on the news and what's happening in our world today. And so I wanted to take those instructions and find something that we can talk about or we can put in our lives today out of this Bible. And so I was looking back at some past notes, and I found something that I've preached on before. And I just think it's very important to go back to talk about these things. We're going to be in Luke chapter 10 is where we're going to be at. We're going to talk about Jesus' parable with the Samaritan. And so, go, love, and serve is what I left you with last week. And so, how do we go? How do we love? How do we serve? And not only how, but when, where, and who do we do this to? And so we need to really get to a part to be thinking of a thing like, you hear these things about loving on everyone, right? It's easy to say, but it's so hard to do in this world that we live in today because we're so divided as a country. This is an election year, a presidential election year. And so every time this comes around, this country starts dividing up into these parties. And I'm with this party, so I vote this way. And I'm with this party, and I vote that way. But the true thing is, if you're a Christian, if you are a Christian, do not let a party's cause pull you away from this. Pull you away from what you really are, and that is a Christian, a Jesus follower. And so we got ready to look at these things, and I found a story, Luke chapter 10. And the title of the story is The Good Samaritan. And we'll talk about that title here in just a second. That's what the Bible has it listed as. And I'm gonna read this thing through completely first, and then we're gonna go back and we're gonna break it down here in just a second. The first part of this It starts out like this. It's verse 25. Luke chapter 10, verse 25 says this. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law, and what is your reading of it? So he answered and said, You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So let's just stop right there and set this scene up for you guys. Jesus is there, and he's talking to some people, and this religious expert, right, this religious leader of the time, asked Jesus this question. You keep talking about this eternal life. Well, how do you get that? How do you get this eternal life? And so he kind of turned it around on the guy and said, well, what is written? What does Moses say about this? Right? As far as your knowledge, your education, what does he say? And then it's very important to listen to the next part. He says, what is your reading of it? What do you make of it? And our terms is, what is your opinion? What do you think after reading that? And so the guy's answer was, love your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. He cared about listening to the guy's answer. Jesus knew exactly what he was going to say, but he listened to someone that was trying to trick him, someone that was trying to test him, someone that didn't like him. We know all these things about these leaders at that time didn't like Jesus, and they constantly tried to test him and trick him. But Jesus still asked for his opinion. Jesus wanted to listen to him and see what he said. Today, where we live at, in our world today, we need to do that more. We need to listen to the people that may not like us. We need to listen to the people that may not think like we do. It's very important to sometimes just be quiet and listen to what someone else has to say. And he said his answer, and Jesus' response in verse 28 was, you have answered correctly. You're right. Now, you can bet this guy probably didn't expect that answer from Jesus. And then Jesus said, do this and you will live. So, love him with all your mind, your heart, your soul, your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. You do these things, you will inherit eternal life. Because if you do these things, that means you're going to believe in Jesus. You're a believer. You can't do those things without being a believer in Jesus. And so he said, if you do these things, young man, you will live forever. And in verse 29, the guy instead of just walking off with his answer, the guy knew, and in his mind, he was thinking to himself, oh, I love God with all my heart and all my soul and all my strength. I do all those things. But the last part of his answer, he probably knew in his heart he didn't do those things. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so he asked Jesus in verse 29, and who is my neighbor? You said I need to love my neighbor as myself. Well, who is my neighbor? Is my neighbor the guy that lives just next door to me? Is my neighbor the guy that I go to church with? Or the family that lives down the road in the same neighborhood? Who is Jesus talking to when we talk about neighbors? And so once again, Jesus, instead of just answering the question, he gets into this parable of the Samaritan man to teach you a lesson. And it's one of these, this parable here is really one of the most famous parables in the Alpha Bible. It truly is. And so Jesus answered him, and this is what he said. He said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and he saw him. He passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, some of your versions may even say a temple assistant, but a Levite or a temple assistant, when he arrived at the place, came and he looked at it. And then he passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring an oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day he departed. He took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him, and for whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. And then Jesus ends it with a question, and he looks at the man. He goes, so which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to him who fell among these thieves? And the guy's answer was, who showed mercy on him. And Jesus said, well then go and you do likewise. So we got quite a bit to kind of take in there, right? So we're going to go back down. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look as we go through the story again. We're going to take a look at each character in this parable. Right? First of all, we got a Jewish man. Right? We got a Jewish man walking down the road. And then we got some thieves. And then we got a priest. We got a Levite. We got a Samaritan. And we got this innkeeper. Now what I really like for you today to do is think about all 6 of these characters in here. Because we can sit back and say, well, I'm the Samaritan. I'm always there to help people all the time. But if we really, as we break this story down, we will see in your life that at some point in time in your life, you were probably all 6 characters. And that's kind of hard to admit, but it is. So let's take a look at a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So we got a man that was walking from Jerusalem down to Jericho. That's probably about a 15 or 20 minute walk. Now, it's very steep. It's very rocky. I found some numbers here, and it says Jerusalem is about 1,200 feet above sea level, and Jericho is about 2,200 feet below sea level. Martin Luther King gave a speech one time, and he talked about being here on this road, and he told his wife, I can see why he chose this road, because it just looks dangerous. It's very steep and rocky. It was also known as the Way of Blood. This road is very notorious for being a place where robbers hung out. But there had to be work to Jericho had to be done, and so people had to travel this road quite a bit, and people were robbed and beat quite often on this road. And so it said a man fell among thieves, and they stripped him of his clothing and wounded him, and they parted him, leaving him half dead. So let's just talk about that man for a second. He gets beat up, he gets robbed, stripped of his clothing. He's laying there, going to die unless someone comes along. Most likely he's feeling really lonely right now. Some of you guys out there listening today have that same feeling right now. Some of you other guys who are listening, you have felt this in your life before, men and women alike. You felt like the world beat you up. You felt like you had no one to turn to. Maybe it's an addiction in your life. Maybe it's a sin that you can't get rid of in your life. Maybe it's just the world itself with life and your job and your kids and everything going on around you is just beating you up. And you're laying there just half dead, waiting for someone waiting for someone. I've been there. I know that feeling. Some of you guys know the same feeling that I'm talking about. And so he's laying there, and all of a sudden a priest comes down the road. And in verse 31 says, and he saw him. He saw him. Jesus says this priest did not just walk by him, that he saw him. And he said he passed by on the other side. So that's kind of telling me he's walking along this side of the road and he sees this man lying there, stripped down, bleeding, half dead, doesn't know if he's dead or alive or anything. And instead of going to check on him, he walked to the other side. Now, why in the world would he do that? Then a Levite came along, or some of your versions may say a temple assistant, like I said a while ago, right? Also somebody that worked in the church. It says when he arrived at the place, he came and he looked. So he got a little closer to the man. He actually looked at him and then went around to the other side. So let's just, why would they do that? They could have been scared. Perhaps they could have been just scared for their own safety. I heard a story last year from some guys that found a man by the railroad tracks. They were working for the railroad and they found a man by the railroad tracks, and they called the police, but they wouldn't go check to see if the man was okay. And one of them said, I was just afraid that whoever jumped this guy would jump us next if we got out there. He was afraid. When we start doing things for others, we can be afraid. I'm not saying you shouldn't be, because we live in a scary world. But Jesus promised that he would be with us always. In Matthew, right? He told them that. I will be with you always. That's for me and you today too. So we need to kind of get rid of that fear, because Jesus is with us. Maybe they were both too busy. I know in church work, a lot of you guys volunteer for a lot of things and this and that, and we can be extremely busy doing this and doing that. But we can't let your church busy work get in front of loving and serving on others and showing compassion for people. I've told this story a couple times, and I'll tell it again. They had a man on his way to church in between church services on a Sunday afternoon, and he was driving. He got about 2 blocks from the church, and he was kind of running late, barely going to make the meeting on time, and he saw a young girl out there with a flat tire, and the tire was on the ground, and the jack was out, and everything she needed, and she was just kind of staring at it. And he stopped, and he went over there, and he rolled his window down, and she said, hey, he needs some help? And he said, yes, sir, I got a flat, and I don't know how to change it. And he actually told the young lady, well, I got a meeting at the church, but if you're here when I get back, I'll help you change that tire. And I'm not here to say that whatever he had going on in church was not important, but he missed the picture on that, right? He missed the boat on that. He needed to help that young lady first, and then whatever happened, that would be fine. And sometimes we don't see that, guys. We see our busy church work comes in front of going. Remember, we got to remember that. Jesus' first words was, his instructions to the disciples was, go and make disciples. Go and do things. And man, we can really get that mixed up a lot of times in our lives. Another part of this story that we have to look at here was this ideal of the Jewish man and a Samaritan man real quick. They didn't like each other. They didn't like each other at all. I did a little research. If you go back to the Old Testament, you can see when the Jewish people when all the tribes got kind of split up, some of them left and some of them stayed, and then they married outside of the Jewish race, the Jewish religion, and then they came back, and when they started rebuilding the temple, these people wanted to help, and they told them, no, we don't need your help. And so they started making it really hard for them to redo that temple, and then they messed up the temple, and then they messed up their temple, and it was this rivalry of what's going on with same people living in the same area of the world that looked a little different and couldn't get along. They despised each other. They despised each other. And so all of a sudden, this Samaritan man comes walking down the road. And he said he saw, in verse 33, it says he saw him and he had compassion on him. We have compassion on the ones that we love. But a lot of times we don't have compassion for the people that we don't really know, or the ones that we don't think we love because we don't know them. But this man knew he was a Jewish man. This Samaritan could look at him and knew he was a Jewish man. And this guy right here laying on the ground does not like me for just who I am. That's the only reason. But he decided, I'm going to help him. I'm going to help him. And so it says he bandaged his wounds and he put oil and wine on his wounds. And then he picked him up and he put him on a donkey, let's say. But it says he put him on his own animal. And then he walked the rest of the way to this inn. And so think about that. This is a dangerous place, a dangerous road. By stopping and helping this man, he put himself at risk. He put himself in danger. Now he's got not only to worry about himself to protect, he's got someone else to protect. He's probably moving slower now that he has two people instead of just one on his trip. The same robbers that robbed this guy could still be in the area. The guy was traveling for some reason. Maybe he was working. Maybe he had a job to go do. All the reasons why the other two didn't stop is why he stopped. He didn't let any of that other stuff get in his way of loving on a stranger. Doing what is right. And if our country would learn that lesson today, let's do what's right. No matter what someone's race is, no matter what party they belong to. Loving on others, serving on others, having compassion for others. This is all the things that Jesus is trying to teach in this thing. Then it says on the next day, I've always loved that part of verse 35. On the next day. So this guy didn't just drop him off and said, hey, I found this man half beaten up. I've done what I could do. Y'all do the rest. He said on the next day, he departed. So he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. That's about a day's pay. That's about 2 days' pay is what that equals for this time period. And he gave them to the innkeeper, and he said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. I will pay you back for what you're going to do while I'm gone. Almost sounds like Jesus, right? I'm leaving for a while. I need you guys to take care of the people that I've been taking care of. I need you guys to do the preaching. I need you guys to do the spreading of the gospel. I need you to heal the sick. I need you to take care of the poor. And when I come back to get you one day, your treasures are in heaven. That's when we get paid back, guys. This innkeeper, we skip him a whole lot because he's just very at the end of the story here. But this innkeeper did what he was supposed to do, I'm assuming, right? We have to assume that this innkeeper took care of this man. He could have said, no, don't leave him with me. I almost look at this innkeeper, this inn they were staying at, this hotel that we want to call it now. I almost want to look at that as a church. And we go out in this world and we find people that's been beat up by this world. And they're hurting and they're struggling and they're looking for help. And we can pick them up and we can bring them here to your church, whatever church you may go to. You can pick them up and bring them to Jesus. And let this church love on these people. Help them as much as they can. Get them back on their feet. That's the kind of things that we're looking for. So at the end of this thing, he says, so which of these things do you think was neighbor to him? Which of these three do you think was neighbor to him who fell among these thieves? So what is he asking? He's saying, hey, out of this story I just told you, man, I told you about 3 different people that came along. Who do you think was his neighbor? Who treated him like a neighbor? Now this religious expert, this religious leader that Jesus was talking to, he knows the priest. He probably was a priest. He knows the Levites. He's in the temple with them all the time. But his answer couldn't be one of them. He couldn't even defend those guys. He said the one that showed mercy on him. And Jesus comes back with his answer and says, go and do likewise. There's that word go again. We had it in last week's message in Matthew. We got a this week's message here. Jesus says, okay, you know the answer. You know the answer. You know you should love your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. Love your neighbor yourself. Go do that. Well, who's my neighbor? Well, this is my neighbor. Okay, then you go act like that guy. And so the parable in this whole thing, this parable that Jesus taught, was who is your neighbor? And I'm here to tell you today, guys, if you're a Christian, that's who your neighbor is. Everyone. Everyone. Whether they look like you, whether they think like you, whether they act like you. When we see someone hurting, we should have compassion on them and do whatever we can to do to help them get out of that situation that they're in. Because that's what we would want in our lives today. So I end almost every sermon the same way. I say, how can we put this story from this Bible in our lives today? And the answer lies in each and every one of you guys. The answer is within you. You have to go take a hard look at yourself. I heard a pastor say a few weeks ago, he was talking about a makeup mirror. And I thought to myself, I don't really know what that is. And then I remembered my grandmother had one. And it's a mirror and it's really close and it's got lights all over the whole thing. And I can remember her putting makeup on in that mirror. And I'd say, man, that's a big mirror. And she goes, well, you don't make any, you see every imperfection here. If you mess up your makeup, you can go back and fix it because you really can see it in this mirror. So guys, when you go home today, that's what you need to do. You need to take a look in these mirrors and understand what it is that you have done wrong in your life. Which character are you in this parable? Where are you at in your life? Hopefully you can go back and to admit the fact that you may not want to admit it, but at one point in time in your life, you were the robbers. I don't really like saying that, but I know in my life, there's been times I hurt people. And I wish I could always say it was an accident, but it wasn't. I've said things to people I shouldn't have said. I hurt those people. I left them hurt on the side of the road and walked off. Now, in turn, I've been the Samaritan. I was the guy that was the priest of the Levite. But because I was so busy with my life, I didn't have time to stop and help. So busy with my kids, so busy with my job, so busy at the church, that I didn't have time to help someone in need. But guys, for us to grow as individuals and grow as a country and grow as a community, we have to take a look at ourselves and know when we did these wrong things and be able to say, I did them, Lord, forgive me for that. Forgive me for that. God puts people in our paths all the time. It was no mistake that Jesus told this story that a man would just happen to walk upon a man that despised him. We have opportunities all the time and we pass them up. We pass them up. I was running late for church one day and I had to pick up a bunch of donuts. And I swung by there and the lady asked me what church it was for, and I said First Baptist in DeQuincy, and she goes, oh, I live right down the road from there. And I said, oh, that's great. And I drove off. I got about 10 minutes down the road and I was like, what did you just do? You put a fellowship breakfast and donuts for your church in front of someone's, maybe their salvation. And I eventually got to go back and talk to that young lady. But I missed that opportunity because of my busyness, because of my church work. And I'm asking you guys today to go back in your life and examine those times that you've done that and change those things in your life. Change the things when you said something bad behind somebody's back. Change the times when you could have helped someone and you didn't. Let's be like that Samaritan, right? And you know, just one little note here. As we notice through this whole story, Jesus never said anything about the Good Samaritan. Read it, any version you want. Jesus never said the Good Samaritan. He just called him Samaritan. But the people that put Bibles together later on, they called this story the Good Samaritan because they didn't like the rest of them. And this is the good one. And that man understood that. Jesus has an encounter with a Samaritan woman, and she's basically like, what are you talking to me for? We can't make people feel like they are less important to Jesus because we are all his children. And that's the way we have to walk around here. That's the way we have to be. Be like that Samaritan. Be like that innkeeper. That's going to take care of someone. Not worrying about what he lost, not worrying about money that comes out of his pocket, not worrying about those things. Just going out, loving on others, serving on others. I want to finish it up with this. Guys that are out here watching this right now, whatever time you're watching it, I want you to just stop what you're doing and get along with God. Have an encounter with Jesus. And pray with me right now. Father God, I just thank you for who you are and what you've done in my life, God. God, I'm sorry for not helping people when I could have, God. I'm sorry for hurting others when I knew better. Thank you for forgiving me for those things, God. God, I ask that you right now reach out to every one of these people that are watching this and have an encounter with them, God. Show them where they're at with this story, God. Show them where they're at in their life right now. What can they improve on? What can they do better on, God? We all can grow from this. God, heal our country. Make us be better people, God. Show us ways to be better people. Thank you for this parable. Thank you for just being who you are and letting us live our lives, God. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.